Hello, welcome to today's EACC webinar, Influencer Marketing, Latest Trends, Do's and Don'ts, and What's Coming Up in 2021. This event is organized by the European American Chamber of Commerce and our network of chapters across the United States and Europe. The EACC is where Europeans and Americans connect to do business. My name is Kristina Slezinska, and I am the Executive Director of the EACC chapter in Florida. We have a good number of people registered from the US, Europe, but also Latin America and the Caribbean. So I'm sure that we'll have a vibrant and informational discussion. One disclaimer, note that all the comments and opinions presented by our speakers are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of the EACC or of its members. Let me now briefly introduce our speakers for the day. We have an absolutely stellar panel. This program is about influencer marketing, and we're very, very pleased to have not one, but two speakers from the Brazilian multinational Havaianas. Yes, the one that makes those iconic flip-flops that everybody wears, and we're in for a little transatlantic travel today as well. Although it's a little bit cold in Miami today, let's put on our flip-flops and let's start off in Los Angeles to meet with Malka Barkohari. Malka is the head of business and legal affairs for Havaianas in North America, where she's responsible for all things legal, including developing and overseeing the company's brand protection program. She joined Havaianas in early 2019 as its first in-house counsel in the United States. Prior to joining Havaianas, Malka worked in the international education sector. She received her JD from Chapman University and has a BA in philosophy from the University of California. Now, let's fly across the Atlantic on to Madrid in Spain to meet with Beatriz Bernabeu. Beatriz is in charge of the legal department of Havaianas, Europe, responsible for the EMEA region, and has been secretary to the board of directors since 2010. Before that, she worked for 3 years at the European Parliament and in the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg, and for another 6 years in the legal department of East Breach Group in Brussels. Beatriz has a degree in European Union law from the University San Pablo in Madrid and a master's degree in international and comparative law from the Vrije Universiteit in Brussels. Now, flying back to the United States, to Miami, to meet with Danielle Garno. Danielle is co-chair of Cozen O'Connor's retail industry team. She focuses her practice on issues faced by the fashion community, including startup phase and commercial advice, intellectual property, social media marketing, advertising, counterfeiting, as well as employment and general business litigation. Danielle represents luxury brands and fashion clients of all sizes. She has written extensively, is a frequent speaker, and currently teaches fashion law at the University of Miami School of Law. And Danielle will be our moderator for today's program. Continuing our trip up north, off we go to Washington, D.C. to meet with Cameron Heffernan. Cameron leads sales and strategic operations for Mac Media. Mac Media is a full-service agency that creates dynamic marketing and corporate communications for multinational companies and clients such as Janssen Pharmaceuticals, Solvay, UCB, and the European Banking Federation in North America and Europe. He lived and worked in Europe for nearly 5 years before launching the US location of Mac Media in 2013. And now, back to Europe, to Milano in Italy, to meet with Lidia Mendola. Lidia is a partner at Portolano Cavallo, where she assists Italian and foreign clients on matters of intellectual and industrial property violations, on consumer protection and advertising. She has particular expertise in the areas of digital and media and technology, life sciences, fashion, and F&B. Lidia is a member of AIPPI and of the Licensing Executive Society. In 2020, she was recognized as Next Generation Partner for Intellectual Property and Best in Copyright at the Women in Business Law Awards, Europe. So now I'm done with the presentations, and without further ado, Danielle, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kristina, and thank you everybody for joining, and it's wonderful to be here with such an amazing panel. Very, very excited. I love this topic. I love to speak about this topic. So we're going to kick off influencer marketing. For those of you who are not familiar with influencer marketing, it is generally the type of advertising where you use somebody or celebrity or somebody who has influence, and you use them to promote your products through social media. So all of their social and media accounts. Instagram is obviously the very popular one. Now TikTok is gaining a lot of traction in this advertising space. My kids come to me every day with a new product that they've seen on TikTok that they want me to buy. So it's working. And so the reason why this has become such a big deal for brands is that it's able to reach consumers that they might not be able to reach through traditional advertising. So print and television. Those are the traditional advertising methods, and now so we're moving to social media. It's because people feel a personal connection to those people that they follow on the social media accounts, and it's a really great way for brands to reach consumers that they can't through social media. And of course, the goal is always to not make it look like advertising. They want it to feel organic. That's always sort of the buzzword when we're dealing with social media marketing. But however, there are rules and regulations around what you can and cannot do when it comes to social media. And we're going to talk about that today from a US perspective and as well in the EU. So I get the pleasure to talk about a little bit of what's happening in the US. And so the Federal Trade Commission is the government entity that regulates all advertising, and that includes social media. So whether it's print, television, anything like that, and their job is to really make sure that there is truth in advertising, that consumers are not misled by brands and advertisers. And so there's Section 5 of the FTC Act is the regulation that governs, and it makes sure that online advertising is not deceptive. And so they found that an ad, if it misleads 10 to 15% of the consumers, then that ad is in fact deceptive. So we're not talking about a high threshold when the FTC is looking to determine whether or not consumers are misled. Now, what's interesting for purposes of especially this discussion, since we're dealing with cross-border issues, is jurisdiction. So although Section 5 is a US law, the FTC has actually come out and said and I'll quote them, it says, to the extent it is reasonably foreseeable that a post, video, etc., will be seen by and affect US consumers, then US law applies and a disclosure, which we'll talk about in a little bit, would be required. So while we haven't seen any enforcement over foreign entities to date, the FTC has actually come out and said that US law would apply, and so those disclosures are required. So we'll see in the future if the FTC takes any such action, but they said that at least they want to. So what do the regulations require? So the FTC generally thinks that the US consumer, the average US consumer, doesn't recognize advertising when they're scrolling through their social media feeds. As this develops and becomes more prevalent, we'll see if they take the same position. But as of now, they've said it's not obvious to the average US consumer that bloggers and Instagrammers and celebrities are paid to post. So they've said that if there's a material connection between the brand and the influencer that consumers would not expect and would affect how consumers evaluate that endorsement, that connection should be disclosed. So when we're talking about paid for advertising, the real easy disclosure that we all see through our social media feeds is hashtag ad, right? Super easy, 3 characters, easy to do. And the FTC has said that that is fine. So other sort of material connections that we see that where a disclosure would have to be made is if you're a relative or an employee, if the influencer is a relative or employee of the brand, if they were paid, if they were given product for free, that is in fact a material connection, even if there is no instructions to post. And of course, if you have an ownership interest in your brand, you have to make that disclosure as well. And the FTC gives you sort of guidelines. They love guidelines for this, and they have them posted on their website in plain English, very easy for any lay person to read and understand. So those sort of disclosures need hashtag ad, hashtag sponsor, thank you for the free gift, you know, brand X. The other thing is that influencers also must be bona fide users of a product or service. So you can't say that this, I'm drinking this, that this gives you caffeine when there's no caffeine in it, or, you know, it has to, and you have to be able to drink it, and it has to be truthful. And the influencer, whatever they're saying about the product, has to be their own honest opinion. Query whether or not you're getting $25,000 for a post and you hate the product, whether or not you're going to say you love it or not. I'm a little bit skeptical as to that, because you obviously want to keep employed, but under the law, they have to give their honest opinion. And so one of the things when you're talking about disclosures, it's very important, is you have to make sure that the disclosure, the hashtag ad, the hashtag sponsored, thank you for the free gift, thank you for the free trip, those have to be clear and conspicuous. That's very, very important. And so what they say, what the FTC says, is that they use these 4 Ps, and you'll see it in the handout, but prominence, is it big enough to read? Color matters, so you don't want to put shades of gray so that they can't see it. You don't want to get cute with your advertising. You want to make sure that the consumer can see what, in fact, the disclosure is. Placement, is the disclosure where consumers are likely to look? Okay, so it has to be right after, you know, the post. And now what the FTC has said is that it has to be right on Instagram, it has to be before the more button. So the more button, there's only 2 lines of text that occur before the more button. So it's advisable and required that you put the disclosure right out of the gate. So post, hashtag ad, and then write your text. And then you don't want to put it on a homepage. You don't want to put it where the consumer has to scroll through it. You don't want to bury hashtag ad a bunch of other hashtags. It has to be, again, clear and conspicuous. It should be right up front. You know, the FTC also thinks that the U.S. consumer is lazy when it comes to looking to see whether or not the disclosure was made, and I agree with them. You know, I'm scrolling through my Instagram feed and I don't see, you know, I'm not clicking on the more button if I'm not interested. I'm not looking at any of that. So they want to make sure that it is upfront and clear. Also, when you're dealing with the now Facebook, Instagram, all of those platforms now have these tools where it says in paid partnership with. The FTC has said, great, use those tools, but that alone doesn't comply. So if you're going to use the in paid partnership with, or whatever the mechanism is for making the disclosure, you also have to make the requisite disclosure in the text of the post. So again, in paid partnership with, hashtag ad, the whole deal. They want it. They want all of it in there. And so what's the downside? And I'll wrap this up on the U.S. Side. But the downside of non-compliance with the regulation, although there are no fines for violation in the first instance, it doesn't mean that the FTC can't institute all sorts of pain upon your company for violations. So what they can do is they can shut down your online and social media marketing. So they can get an injunction preventing you from online marketing. And that is really, like, I think, the death knell of any company these days. If you cannot reach your consumer through digital means, that's a huge problem. So even though there are no fines, it doesn't mean that there isn't a significant downside. They can disgorge profits from the sale of, you know, the good where you violated the law. If you're a publicly traded company, they like press releases, so there could be a potential stock drop when, you know, it comes out in the media that you violated the law, and now you have to enter into a consent order preventing you from doing X, Y, and Z. And recently, before COVID, the commissioner of the FTC had come out publicly and said, I don't really think that the fact that we don't have any fines is adequate anymore. When he was speaking about it, he was using terms as far as, you know, this is, when it's deceptive advertising, it's illegal payola for the brands. And he was using these really heavy-handed terms that we usually see in criminal context. So they are reevaluating whether or not the fines are going to, if they're going to institute fines and add some real teeth to Section 5. So that is the latest and greatest on the US law, and I'm going to turn it over to Lydia to talk about the EU framework and all of the differences between the two.
Okay, thank you very much, Danielle, and thank you to the EACC for inviting me to this event and being part of this outstanding panel. And thank you, Danielle, for the questions. Yes, when we talk about influencer marketing and EU regulatory framework, we need to start from the Directive 29 issued in 2005, which is the one related to the unfair commercial practice. As you probably know, the directive, the goal of the directive was to harmonize the legislation related to consumer protection into different EU jurisdictions. And one of the points that the directive raised were related to unfair commercial practices using misleading advertising in order to deceive consumers and to prevent them from making, let's say, informed and efficient transactional decision. Among the misleading practice, the directive lists misleading action and misleading omission. And with reference to misleading omissions, Article 7 of the directive says that it must be regarded as misleading omission the failure to identify the commercial intent of the certain commercial practice, if it is not immediately apparent from the context, and if it might cause the consumer to take a transactional decision that he would not have taken otherwise. Now, the topic of the lack of disclosure of the commercial intent became very serious, very urgent with the booming also in EU of the influencer marketing strategies, since through the influencer marketing, through the social media platform and the influencer marketing strategies, basically brands advertisers can reach consumers directly using messages that are for some partially personal, having partially personal nature and commercial nature, and so the mixture, the fusion among these two natures of the message basically raise the topic of the hidden advertising through social media platform, which is extremely let's say intrusive for consumers and so endangers for consumers. That's why the national legislators were called to implement the principle of transparency of advertising and truth of advertising, of course, because the two principles go in the same direction at the same time within the national consumer laws and within the self-regulation codes. As you probably know, some of the European jurisdictions had this double system. We have the national system and then also the ADV self-regulation system with help players of the market to be compliant with relevant legislation. So basically the Italian Competition Authority and the RDV self-regulation body in Italy, and the same thing for UK, so the Competition and Markets Authority in England, and the ASA, which is the regulatory body which implements the RDV self-regulatory code, were called to offer to the players solution in order to carry out influencer marketing strategy compliant with the national consumer legislation. And as you mentioned, basically the competent authority inspired by the FTC and the guidelines issued by the FTC offer to the players almost the same solution. So they suggested the players of the market to use like what is called in UK advertising features, or in Italy, ADV labels, which means the use of ADV, advertisement, as a formal tool in order to inform the consumer that he's approaching a message that has commercial intent. Now, there are some minor differences among UK, Italy, and US. For example, in UK, you can use advertising or ADV with or without the hashtag. Instead, in Italy or in US, the hashtag is absolutely mandatory and is required to be used by advertisers and influencers. Or in UK, for example, there is a long list of precedents where the ASA says that the term sponsored by is not sufficiently clear in order to disclose their commercial intent. Instead, it works absolutely fine. It's fine for Italy and it works for US. So apart those few, let's say, minor differences, the FTC guidelines made open the path also to European authorities. There is another big differences among the Italian system, EU system, and US system, which is related to fines. Actually, antitrust authority, which is Italian antitrust authority, which is the authority that has the jurisdiction to enforce national consumer law, can issue fines, economic fines, against advertisers and influencers in case of non-compliance with relevant provisions. According to my experience, I mean, and based on the long list of precedents that we have in Italy, even important, pretty, let's say, expensive fine has been issued in the past in case of misleading advertising. And even recently, in case of misleading advertising related to COVID, let's say, product pretending to have, to prevent from COVID in some way, like that was for cosmetics, for hygienics products, and so on. So, and fines can be pretty high in some cases. The antitrust authority, for the time being, never issued fines in case of lack of disclosure of commercial intent, because basically in Italy we are still in let's say training phase of the market, because the antitrust authority first issued a number of moral suasion letters addressed to the players of the market, and then started some cases, but never ending up with sanctions, always ending up with commitments of the parties. So basically, antitrust authority is still trying to train the players of the market, since probably EU and Italian players in particular are a bit immature if compared to US players of the market. I mean, influencer marketing in US is it's a step farther compared to EU and Italy. But it's quite predictable that the approach of the antitrust authority will shift to the training approach, to the sanctioning approach in the very next future. Then there are some few minor differences among the system. Basically, okay, UK doesn't, the antitrust, the competition and trade authority in UK cannot issue fines, but misleading advertising can be criminal, can open a criminal proceeding in UK in very, very serious case, which is not the case in Italy, and I guess neither in US. So those are the main differences. Then there are some other topics that we can discuss, but I guess it's better if I let the floor to Cameron, maybe, I don't remember, and then we can talk also about contracts.
Well, I think that what's interesting too is that you mentioned the COVID related advertising. So we too in the US have seen a huge uptick in enforcement as far as companies that are making false claims about what products can and cannot prevent COVID. And so there's been, I think in all jurisdictions and all over the world, all the enforcement agencies are really now focused on what claims are being made about what products as they relate to this pandemic. So a really, really, I think, interesting point. So lawyers have talked about, or outside counsel have talked about, the framework for the EU and the US, which is all well and good, but I think we should learn, and our attendees should understand, the practical aspects of dealing with influencers and how, a massive global brand deals with this all across the world. So, Beatrice and Malka, and maybe Beatrice first, how does Havaianas work with influencers, in your jurisdictions and across the globe?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, Danielle, and thank you, ACC, for inviting Havaianas. So this is a great honor to be here in this panel and to be invited as a company. So as you say, what I'm trying to I will try to convey to the audience, like what is the practical aspect of the influencers, and how does Havaianas work with influencers, which we do for already quite a while, I mean, several years, and we've been using them increasingly. And why is that? I think you touched base upon this already, Danielle, at the beginning in your introduction. For us, for brands, influencers are a great way. Actually, it's a fantastic way, because it's like it's a way of doing advertisement without being too intrusive and without being too direct. And that's what users now want, because what we don't want is the users, they don't want like a too intrusive advertising campaign. So this is a great way, influencers. On the other hand, so it's playing an essential role for us. But what I would like also to make a note, because sometimes when we think about influencers, especially in the fashion industry, we think about influencers like pretty or gorgeous girls and models and so on, and it's not always the case. Influencers are people that influence, as you said before, Danielle. So that influence and influence the purchase of a consumer. And this is what we use as well. So we don't use always like models or these sort of influencers. For the selection of the influencers, actually, the PR agency and the communication agencies play a very important role. So we rely very much on them. But there is a basic principle that we always keep in mind as a brand. And is that Havaianas is a very, for those of you that know the brand, which I hope all of you and all the audience, so Havaianas is a very, it's a love brand. So we have a very large fan base, I would say, like followers, if I may use the term, which are very much attached to the brand from an emotional point of view. So to that extent, we always want to be very authentic with the influencers that we hired. And all of them, so they have like an emotional connection to the brand. And this is something that we truly believe in. We hire influencers that are users of the brand. So, and this is the basic principle, and that all our PR agencies are aware of. Then it depends really on the campaign. So what we want to reach. Sometimes, like if we want to reach like to create buzz, or to increase brand awareness in certain countries in Europe where the brand awareness is lower. For instance, I don't know, I can think of Germany, for instance, where the brand awareness is there's still a way to go. Then we would hire like more larger influencers. If we want more like a more qualitative communication, or a more something like to target more a certain country, so we would reach more of a micro influencer. So it depends very much of what we want. For instance, we also depend on the product that we want to launch. Sometimes, like we have new launch of product. We have, I can think of we had a marketing campaign, or an influencer campaign with Mini Me. So it was called like for kids. So the flip flop together with the mini flip flop, the mom together with the baby, right? So for that campaign, we hire influencers moms, so who are the kind of in a lifestyle family environment. Also, for instance, we had another one with gamers when we launched the Minecraft model. So depending also on the model, we would go for one or another sort of influencer. But in any case, I mean, what we feel or what we've seen all over the years is that the influencers, they have become very professionalized, at least those that we work with, and because also it's a very competitive environment. So at the same time, you know, we are very demanding as a brand, I think, like any other brand, but we get a lot of in return. Also, what another important aspect that we deal with and we pay attention, of course, is the remuneration. Given that it's publicity, so it's advertising. This is what qualifies it as an advertisement. Sometimes, so we pay in as a financial compensation to the influencers. What we are doing a lot as well, especially in high season, in peak season, which is the summer for us, is trips. So we organize the trips to our mother country, which is Brazil, or to other hotspots, like summer hotspots, which can be Ibiza here in Spain, or in France, Saint-Tropez, or in Italy, Capri. So these sort of places, which is also, I mean, you lawyers specialized would tell us, but which is also a way of remuneration. And also the last sort of remuneration that we are seeing and that we are implementing, it's the commission for sales. So the influencers get a code, and depends on the sales that are affected by users using this code. So they would get a percentage over this. It is not really working very well for us, this system, because our product is not very expensive. It's quite affordable, so it's not very attractive for our consumers. And finally, I think what is also important to highlight is the content. So what does the influencer, what is the process? What does the influencer post on the posting? Which is this is something, even though we work on a trust relationship with our influencer, because as I said before, so these are people that are basically our users. So we always validate the content to make sure that there are no infringing rights on IP rights in the use of the images, to make sure that the tone is the appropriate, and also, of course, to make sure that the influencer is using the appropriate hashtags and advertising disclaimers. So it's something that we do in common with our advertising agency. And then, so at the end of the process, it comes a result. So we analyze, well, we know, I don't analyze anything, but the marketing department, our digital marketing department, analyzes the results and whether these, you know, the KPIs are met or not, and then we would be able to make a decision as to continue with this influencer or switch to another sort of strategy. I think in the US it's something very similar. What I spoke about is what we the strategies that we use in EMEA. So this is the region it's under me, but my colleague Malka, I think it's pretty much the same in the US. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I can comment from the point of view of the geography. It's pretty similar in terms of we will target specific areas that are hotspots. So in the US, that happens to be California, Florida, Hawaii. So we will partner with influencers that are very specific to the region and also local to to the cities that we want additional presence in. Obviously, prior to COVID, we were also really interested in these local micro influencers in certain cities because we love to have activations in person. Sometimes that would be down the street from our retail store. Our office is here in Venice Beach, so if we had an influencer that's local here and was as part of the partnership with us going to promote some product in person at an event, those are a lot of the drivers to selecting specific influencers. As far as a brand, everything that Beatrice mentioned in terms of finding and partnering with influencers that are on brand with us. So that's joyful, colorful, obviously some element of the beach or pool going. So that's also very, very important. We go through a similar process in the selection, but I would say that over the years in the U.S., we've varied a little bit. We have used our outside PR agency for the selection of influencers. However, starting in 2019, last year, we started to engage influencers directly. The reason that we started doing that, we wanted to have the opportunity to build relationships with these influencers more closely. And in fact, there are some influencers that we've used year over year. So I think when you work directly, there's obviously more work for our internal marketing team. But the plus side is that you actually get to form a relationship with the influencer, and it's a little bit of a different connection there. And I would say also along the lines of what Danielle described in the US, there's a lot to watch out for in terms of compliance with the guidelines. So that's something that, going through our content review process internally, that's something that's always checked, the hashtags, the disclosures. And so very much along the same lines of what you're doing in Europe, Beatrice, but the US happens to be a little bit more litigious, and so we have our antennas on pretty high.
I mean, it's really interesting, and especially when you're talking about, Javiana's working directly and making sure that your influencers are on brand for you and having that connection. I think that's so important. Beatrice, and you talked about authenticity. That is, I think, really a key, objective for anybody that's working with influencers. And I know Cameron, in the media space, we talked about, he's the last piece that we really haven't talked about, this other spoke in the wheel, as far as how the media PR firms and everything work with brands and influencers. So Cameron, can you tell us a little bit about how that works?
Sure. And I think there's something that Danielle had said earlier when she was speaking initially that I found quite interesting. There's a challenge, marketing and sales, and the legal side of the fence. There's diametric opposition that's built into the equation. A best practice in a post, whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, whatever it is to move all your good stuff, your meat, up to the top. And I wouldn't put, from a marketing standpoint or brand standpoint, a legal disclosure statement as something that I'm just dying to read and can't wait to just dig my hands into. So there's always going to be that challenge, and a good brand or a good agency will have a good relationship with the legal side of it to know, hey, what can't we do with this, whether it's a contest, whether it's a relationship. I'm going to bring up, I'm the only person showing slides today, so the pressure's on not to induce death by PowerPoint, but let me give it a shot. Some thoughts from the perspective of an agency that works with clients who do some influencer marketing, not as big as Javiana's maybe, but some things to think about and some trends to be aware of as this grows in scope. So, while I'm doing that, if everybody can find on GoToWebinar the chat, and what I'd like to ask you as I'm fiddling around with my slides is, are you doing influencer marketing now? Yes or no? Just type into the chat a simple yes or no. Yes, if you're already doing influencer marketing, as Javiana says, or no. So what I'm going to cover are a few, not too many, data points and some trends that we're seeing and how those could be relevant. A couple things to avoid, and it's, I'm going to focus more on the brand and the brand impact side of things rather than the legal side of things. One particular opportunity, I believe, as Beatrice touched on, a space to watch for this. And then finally, where do you begin? If you're looking at this, what are some good steps to take? So Todd, go ahead to the next slide. This is a study that was done, a joint study by Influencer Marketing Hub and Creator IQ. And it's showing how this space is growing, okay? This is the survey was done before COVID really hit, but irrespective of that, you're looking at, in this year, close to 10 billion being spent by brands on influencer marketing. Roughly, I don't have my slide rule with me, that's roughly 50% year-over-year growth right there in that bar chart. I don't think anybody would be happy with that kind of growth rate. And it's important to point out that the respondents to this survey were about 70% B2C companies, so consumer brands like Havaianas, et cetera. I'm going to talk a little bit too about the B2B side of things because it can apply on both, and some of the same best practices will apply. But you see here tremendous growth. I don't think we're saturated with this yet. I think we're far from it. You could do 50% growth, maybe to the middle of this decade, and still have scope to keep scaling it up. So I don't feel this space is saturated yet, but it shows there's lots of opportunity. Okay, next slide. So what are some of the challenges here? In this particular survey, 2/3 of the respondents indicated that there was fraud with their influencers. That falls in a lot of different categories that I'll touch on in a moment, but it shows both the opportunity of this, but then the downside if you don't do it wrong. If you're not doing your legal due diligence, if you're not doing your brand due diligence, making sure that your influencers are aligned with your brand and on message with your brand. A good example is working with children. The child might be the person you're focusing on. My kid watches some of these videos too, and he just can't get enough of them. But the mother and the father are also active on social media, and you kind of get the whole family with the deal. When the Lakers had Lonzo Ball on the team, they also had to work with his father, and he was out there in social media. So those are things you need to think about when you're looking at the impact and who are we actually hiring to do our influencing. So the challenge is obviously legal and compliance side of things, but then ensuring that we're not doing more damage or potential risk to our brand identity with an influencer that's maybe the best influencer in the world with a lot of followers, but it's not aligned correctly in the right way with your brand, what you want to convey. So if it's done wrong, it can put you in the spotlight for the wrong reasons. Let's take a look at some of those examples, Todd. So here's three that kind of jump to mind. The first one is on the far right. Our agency is headquartered in Belgium. We're here in the US. And so this happened after the last World Cup. Belgium was playing US in the World Cup. And this young lady is a Belgian fan. I think World Cup model scouts, it's a big growing field. You always have some new model that's discovered at one of the World Cup events, photographed and have a contract. It also speaks to the speed with which that happens. So this young lady was hired to a contract by L'Oreal in Belgium to do some work. She put out on social media a picture of her. You see it right there. I think it's an oryx in Southern Africa that she was involved in. Specifically, she was the one who did it, but a poaching sort of an incident, tragedy, and it ended her contract. It resulted in her losing that contract. I would say that L'Oreal didn't do the best job of looking into her profile and her background that was already on her profile. Again, these are things that you have your legal due diligence, and then you have your brand due diligence. You could find that easily with a quick scan of social media before even turning to your social media listening tools and your other analytics and data points. The Kylie Jenner Pepsi debacle commercial from last summer. Again, nothing illegal there. There's nothing illegal about tone deafness or appearing opportunistic. And it was an ad that, here's an example, I think that the tweet says, "I just solved all the problems in the country by being rich and thin and white and pretty. What else should I do today?" So not the way you want your ad to be, your brand to be portrayed. That's not the media coverage you want. You'd probably see hashtag brand fail with that. So again, nothing illegal with it, but thinking about how will this come across to my audience using this particular influencer. And then finally, to the Fire Festival. Great job promoting an event, great job getting the word out and using celebrities to really motivate it, but a bad job on the execution. Nothing illegal about a poorly run festival. There's some elements that I think that may have been people, there are lawsuits involved with it, but not the kind of face you want to have on your brand, where you're not thinking it through correctly and working with the wrong types of people to do the execution. A big failure, a big setback. Next slide. Another one, the military is moving away every year from traditional media to new media, and particularly to esports. We're talking about people watching people play video games, and it's a growing area. They're doing a lot of sponsorships and advertising on platforms like Twitch. This is a scenario where the Army was offering giveaways to a special Xbox controller, but when people clicked on the offer, it led to a recruitment page. So it was, misalignment of an offer, the perception of feeling cheated. People then were complaining. They had to take down the offer. And again, you're doing more harm to your brand than what you initially intended to do by not thinking through all the alignment and the execution of what you're offering. Working with influencers not done right can do more harm. Next slide. So an example of an opportunity that I'd like to talk about a little here is how this has changed and grown. 4 or 5 years ago, influencer marketing was bigger names, celebrities, some of the endorsers that are quite well known and have a lot of followers. Let's call them mega influencers. Those with over 1 million followers, your household names. The micro influencers, those with less than 100,000 followers, and there's even a category beneath that, nano influencers. The ratio of those is about 1 to 3. Well, that's shifted. So in marketing speak, that's sort of the long tail. The long tail is small business in this country. There's a lot more small businesses that are in this country, in Europe as well, than the big Fortune 500s or 100s. It's now shifted to a 1 to 10 ratio of mega influencers to micro influencers. So what does that mean? Well, I think a couple things. One is it's become more mainstream and more affordable. It's much easier to work with somebody who has developed a good following on Instagram or Facebook organically, and done so, built it up over time, and has 50 to 100,000 followers. If they're the right followers for your product, that has a lot of opportunity and you can afford them. It also means there's a potential for B2B companies to work with some influencers and not just household brand names. And that's what some of our clients are doing. Influencer marketing goes into the B2B realm with things like, webinars, thought leadership, content, joint bylines, partnerships. Again, picking the right individual that fits your brand to tell that story. But the same elements still hold. You don't want someone promoting your brand who's not really enthusiastic or energetic about it. So picking that person or that partner for authenticity and credibility is still important. Next slide. So these are all big mega influencer celebrities that probably none of us could afford to associate with our brand. Next slide. Here's the examples of micro influencers. They're active. I think these are all just Instagram examples, and it's exploding on that channel. Doesn't mean it's just Instagram. It doesn't mean it's just B2C brands. These are where I think this is going to continue to grow this space. And then you come back to your challenges from before: alignment with brand, legal issues that may arise from influencers who maybe aren't as experienced or don't understand the concept of exclusivity. Those kinds of elements, there's a lot of education that goes into it. And again, just diligence from a legal or a brand perspective. And let's go to my last slide, please, Todd. So where do you start with this? Right at the top of the list, I think it's knowing your audience and your brand. It's having awareness of your buyer personas and keeping those up to date and current. What touch points do your audiences and your prospects, your clients go through on their customer journey to your brand? That's where your brand wants to be, in those conversations. And knowing how they interact with your brand at all those different touch points, digital, in person, these days more virtual events, online, offline. What does that look like? Who are the influencers that are touching them across those touch points that are going to have positive impact? And again, do they align and fit with our brand? They could be telling the best story in the world, but if they're talking about vanilla and we're selling chocolate, it might not be the right fit. Do your due diligence both from the brand and the legal side. And then finally, how does this fit into our overall strategy? You saw the numbers of how it's growing. I think as it grows, it's also going to become both more expensive for the higher end influencers, but yet more affordable for these micro influencers. And how do we keep this authentic and on brand with what we're trying to, the experience we're trying to share about our brand? And I'll kick it back to Danielle.
Thanks, Kara. That was, so interesting. You touched on so many important points that I know just as us as lawyers, sort of give us heart palpitations when you start talking about children and advertising to children and using children as influencers. That raises a whole host of issues. The Fyre Fest was just an epic fail on all levels, which resulted in the influencers themselves getting sued for fraud, for misleading, for allegedly knowingly misleading their consumers. Which there was another case, I believe it was Floyd Mayweather was selling crypto, or was an influencer for crypto. The SEC came in and shut him down and issued a fine. So even though we're talking about the FTC in some aspects, some of the stuff you have to be really, really, really careful about what you are saying to your consumers, because the FTC is one arm of it, but if you start getting into criminal or misleading, when you're talking about the SEC, even and Malka touched upon it. Yes, in the U.S. we are very litigious. When you start, consumers start to bring their own claims for fraud and for damages. So those are all these issues that we need to really be concerned about. So there's a lot of content in this program, and I think we have a couple. I think I saw a couple questions. Christina, I don't know if you were fielding those.
So one of the questions, I think this is one for Lydia. Do you think that the current discussions on AVMSD transposition and implementation in the EU will impact on how brands work with influencers? In particular, given that some influencers will be considered an audiovisual services in their own right, and so may have to follow rules previously only applicable to TV on demand on product placement in consumer information review style content. Lydia, that one is for you.
Okay, it's pretty difficult questions and far from the topic we are discussing now. Actually, Italy is very far from the transposition of the MSD implementation of the MSD EU law. There are a lot of, it's a very complicated set of provision. One of the topic, yes, is one that mentioned in the questions related to the qualification of the influencers as audiovisual services. Actually, I don't know the answer because it's still very debated. I'm not sure that's gonna be the conclusion of our legislature, actually. I'm not sure we will end up with this solution, but it is still on the table and it's still under debate, under discussion. So I can't give you an answer, actually.
Okay, so we have a few more minutes to go, and we just received one question. We have another one. So maybe real quickly, with influencers not being professional marketeers and their campaign not being scripted, isn't there a risk that the influencer hurts the brand rather than promoting it? I think this was already answered to a certain extent during the program.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
By Cameron. And
yeah,
then
and there's that balance of authentic. You want to keep your influencers authentic and real and human and personal. Yeah, not divulging too much. It's like, you know, it's like a crazy uncle at the Christmas dining room table. His personality is terrific, but you never know when I say the wrong thing. So there's that balance.
Right, thank you. And then there's one last one. Are the various regulatory entities more likely to come down on the endorser or the advertiser? Can you discuss whether the level of reaction is dependent on size, influence of the advertiser endorser? I think this could be a rather long answer. Danielle, correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I can make it short. No, they're only going to go after the they're only going to go after the advertiser. Now they can go after the influencer, they can go after the PR firm. And what we've seen only is really the FTC has come out and said, look, we're not monitoring influencers. You know, if something comes to our attention, we'll take a look at it. You know, if they haven't done anything with the Kardashians to date, then they're probably not going to go after any influencers at this time. So yes, the main focus is by far on the advertiser.
Fantastic. Oh, go ahead, Lydia.
I know it's different in the EU. I know it's different.
Sorry if I interrupt you. More or less the same in Italy, unless the influencer directly adhere to the IDV self-regulation system, so it became member of the system. There is just one influencer that did it, which is Chiara Ferragni, who is officially part of the IDV self-regulation system. So she's, I mean, obliged to be compliant with the code as the brands are at the same, I mean, same level.
Okay, so I wish we could continue this discussion. It has been fascinating, but we need to wrap up. So this concludes today's webinar entitled Influencer Marketing, Latest Trends, Do's and Don'ts, and what's coming up in 2021. Many thanks to our stellar speakers, Malka, Beatrice, Lydia, Cameron, and our moderator, Danielle, for sharing their knowledge and experience. Thank you also to our invisible Todd Schwartz, who is the Executive Director at EACC Cincinnati and who worked with me on the technical side of the webinar. And especially many thanks to you, our audience, for joining us and for asking questions. We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us again in the future. And as I'm at it, 2 of you answered no, we do not do any influencer marketing. For now, keep an eye on our follow-up email, and remember, EACC is a connector. EACC members who attend our webinars can connect with the other attendees, just like during live events. Just contact your local chapter, contact me to find out how, and check our website for upcoming webinars and events. Again, thank you very much. And since this is almost the season, happy holidays to everyone and the best of wishes for a healthy and hopeful 2021.